Anyway, I got an interesting show for you guys today. We're going to go all the way back to 1984. We are going to look at a particular album from 1984. And it's a breakdancing song called Electric Kingdom. Here it is here in Wikipedia, 1984. And what I'm going to show you today is how the insiders know the agenda long before everyone else does. And they start trickling out little clues and things to laugh at us, to make us feel, or make themselves feel as though they're justified in what they're about to do to us. Now, growing up, I was into breakdancing. I remember this song called Electric Kingdom. The group, as you see here, Twilight 22. So I looked up the lyrics because it had been a while since I had heard this song. I'm not going to play the song for you, but many of you remember it if you grew up in the 80s and were in the breakdancing, during the breakdancing era. Back in the jungle, a man is free, free from the street, from captivity. Break out, breaking, it doesn't matter where you've been. Snake pit, lion's den, you need someone to be your friend. Come to Electric Kingdom. Now, what is this all about? Well, obviously there's some biblical references here. The lion's den, Daniel, the snake pit. Of course, that's the enemy, right? And here's one of the covers. This is actually the main cover for Electric Kingdom, as you can see here, Twilight 22. And what are they really talking about here? Well, I've told you guys that the electric grid will become the prison. The electric grid will become the prison. And they like to make fun of the people that do not want to live on the electric grid. How do they do that? By basically saying that we want to live in the jungle, and it's the law of the quote-unquote jungle. Well, what that is it's the enemy making fun of God's plan, which is being out in the wilderness outside of Egypt. Look at the pyramid hiding back there in the backdrop in the upper right corner. This is the Electric Kingdom. And look at, they even kind of show you the hypocrisy of it all. That electricity is created by coal. So here they've got the polluting coal towers, right? That are running the Electric Kingdom. Wow. And look at this. Down here in the bottom, they show plug and play electric cars. Now, as far as I know, 1984, was there even any electric cars in 1984? I don't remember any electric cars in 1984. Basically, that whole thing was just a dream. No one ever thought there would be an entire world of electric cars. But yet, here it is in 1984. Now, of course, the 1984 year holds a lot of context to it, doesn't it? Because that is the prison from the book 1984, George Orwell. This is how they're going to achieve it with the Electric Kingdom. Now, what else do we have here? Well, what does Twilight 22 mean? Now, this is where I'm going to seal the deal. This is where you'll realize that you can't make all this stuff up. Well, was this about the year 2022? Or maybe 2020? Well, in 2021, many of you will remember that 22 royal mummies were moved in a parade. This was some kind of ritual Here you can see it, Egyptian mummies. Exactly 22 of them. Do you guys remember this story? Well, I'm about to show you what this really means. This is the 22nd dynasty of Egypt. It was called the Bubasite or Bubastite dynasty. Look at this, the 22nd dynasty. Now, those of you with ears to hear know what Bubastite really means. Bubastite is the root word for bubonic, as in bubonic plague. Now, this is a bubos, and I'm not going to show you this picture because it's kind of disgusting, but this is the Wikipedia page for what a bubos is, after which bubonic plague was named. And they call it that because there are swollen lymph nodes, and they appear like in the neck, the groin, the thighs, and the armpits. Well, this is Bastet, the cat goddess. And she ruled Bubastis. And she brought plague to humanity. Now, this is really weird, because back when I was in like my 20s, I guess, late 20s, I had picked up some cats from the pound, and the whole family, except for my ex-wife, got these bubos all over our bodies. Mine I got in my side of my head, underneath the skin. My daughter got them on her neck. My son in his forearms. And we went to an infectious disease doctor, and he said it was called cat scratch fever, which kind of acts a lot like the plague. You get these bubos all over your body, but you recover from it. It's actually pretty common in certain areas of the world. What's the point I'm getting at here? Well, cats carry disease, just like rats do. Right? So, this goddess, Bastet, who ruled Bubastis, brought disease, but she also cured it. How did she do that? Well, cats kill rats, which carry disease. But the cats also carry disease, as it says right here. Bastet was also depicted as the goddess of protection against contagious disease, but then she was also the goddess of disease. Now, here's where things go off the rails. This is where I'm going to tie it all in together. Bastet was associated by the Greeks to Artemis. What? Whose twin was Apollo. Remember we talked about Apollo? That he was the bringer of disease and also the cure for disease. And remember we told you that he required a sacrifice of 100 cattle. Wow. Now, let's keep going, because there's more. Here's the part about Apollo. This is out of the Encyclopedia Britannica. And her name was originally Bust, which became Ubaste. It also means a jar with ointment in it, which basically says that, you know, that it could be, there could be a medicine aspect to it. Okay. Ointment jar. The Greeks associated her with Artemis, twin brother of Apollo. Wow. So, let's take a look at this other album cover. I think this might have been the 45. This is the 45 maxi cover. And here you see the Electric Kingdom atop a pyramid with a sun or an all-seeing eye. The 22nd dynasty, which now seems to mean Apollo and his sister bringing plague to the world. This was in 1984, you guys. Bubos, swollen lymph nodes. So she brought disease and cured it by ridding the grain silos of the rats. Now, I very carefully counted the rays of the sun on this album cover, and you can do it too. I'll put a link to this in the pinned comment. I very carefully counted the rays, and if you count the ray that's right up against this pyramid on each side, you have a total of 77. We are in the Electric Kingdom. The segue to that was the plague. That was the segue, because you have to bring the world to its knees to enter the Electric Kingdom. This is Bubastis Temple, and it was at Temple Island, described as a temple island. It almost looks like a light bulb, doesn't it? An ancient temple. A bulb. It also looks like a cotton swab, surrounded by water. The Electric Kingdom. We covered Baron Thump's Marvelous Underground Journey last week. Many of you will remember. And some of you guys asked me to take a look at another one of Ingersoll Lockwood's books called The Last President. Here it is right here. Here's a really old copy of it, actually. And this published in 1900, 10 years after Baron's Underground Journey. Now, a lot of people have covered this already, or at least done a Cliff Notes version of it. But we're going to do a deep dive today for about the next 30 minutes. And some of the stuff that you may have heard before, but there will be other aspects of this that will be completely new to you. Now, why are we looking at this now? Well, because the book actually holds some really good ideas about how to fix the country. In other words, the real way to run a country, the biblical way, like how God would run a country. Okay? Now, this book is crazy because they actually mention Pence by name. Now, we're going to look at each of these pages so you guys can get an idea of what's going on. There's a little bit of a lag with, because it's such a huge PDF file. But look at here. They mention Pence's name by name as this Secretary of Agriculture. Let me zoom this up a little bit so you guys can see this. Mentioned one time in the entire book. Now, the book is about this controversial president, the last president, of course, who changes America forever. He's from New York, which makes this book, at first glance, feel like a prophecy of modern times, and more specifically, a Thump prophecy, right? But there's something else going on here, because throughout the whole CIA-run movements that saturated the media coverage during the Thump presidency and beyond, his followers really wanted to believe that this was a prophetic book about Thump being the last president. This is what they all wanted and thought, but upon closer examination, something else is going on here. Now, he obviously wasn't the last president for various reasons, but there are much more important reasons this book really didn't fulfill the prophecies within it. It read more like a propaganda piece that anticipated the Thump deception and offered people false hope and offered them, false promises in the way that he would, quote unquote, make America great again, right? This was his promise. So there's some of that in here, but most of this he never intended to change and never even brought it up. And the book actually outlines strategies, specific strategies to turn America around. A strategy that Thump actually rejected when he was in office. Now I'm talking about things like Federal Reserve. They talk about big business. They talk about Wall Street. They talk about oppressive taxes on the poor and so much more. It's all mentioned in this book. They talk about a gold standard as well. So let's dig into this. Now, the book starts with this guy named Brian, and he is the last president. And he begins passing all these executive orders and systematically dismantles every aspect of America that was causing America harm and causing them to implode. For instance, here's our first example. Usury is mentioned. Now, this is crazy. Usury, you know, we all talk about that now, but this book actually calls it out. Let's take a look at some of these instances here. Now, what is usury? Well, it's loaning money, keeping people in debt. It's basically an entire financial system that keeps people in debt and slaves to the government and the debtors that run them. Okay. Now, this particular page says, and yet at this moment, when the night air quivered with the mad vociferations of the common people, that the Lord had been good to them, that the wicked money changers had been driven from the temple, that the stony-hearted usurers were beaten at last, that the people's William was at the helm now, that peace and plenty would in a few moons come back to the poor man's cottage, that silver was king, I king at last, the world still went. Go to the next page. Wondering why red-eyed anarchy, as she stood in Haymarket Square with thin arms aloft, with wild mine and wilder gesticulation, drew no mob of dynamite from her bosom to hurl at the hated minions of the law who were silent spectators of this delirium of popular joy. So they're basically talking, they're like rejoicing at this point because Brian is the new president. And he's doing away with the usurers. He kicked the money out of the temples, right? Let's keep reading. Why was it thus? Look, and you shall know why white-robed peace kept step with the turbulent band and turned it through from red-handed pillage. He was there, the master spirit, to hold them in leash. He and he alone had lifted Brian to his great eminence. Without these 24 electoral votes, Brian had been doomed, hopelessly doomed. He and he alone held the great commonwealth of the West, hard and fast in the democratic line. Hence, he came as a conqueror, as a kingmaker, and the very walls of the sky-touching edifices trembled as he was dragged through the crowded streets by his orderly mob. So, it goes on. You're our savior. You've cleaned the temple of liberty, of its foul horde of usurers. We salute you. We call you kingmaker. Brian shall call you master too. You shall have your reward. You should stand behind the throne. Your wisdom shall make us whole. You shall purge the land of this unlawful crowd of moneylenders. You shall save the republic. You are greater than Washington. You're a better friend of ours than Lincoln. You'll do more for us than Grant. We're your slaves. We salute you. So obviously they're worshiping this man. But he has some really good ideas in this book. Hooray, hooray, hooray. So everyone's all excited about this. There's one other mention of usurers here I want to show you. On page 35. As it loads up. Now, he talks about also backing the money with gold and silver. And he also talks about how corrupt Wall Street is. He actually compares Wall Street to Satan. Let's read this part about the users first. Wicked and selfish class of users and speculators fasten upon you, and on this anniversary of the birth of the Father of our country, let us renew our pledges to undo completely and absolutely their infamous work, and in public assembly and family circle, let us by new vows confirm our love of right and justice, so that the great gain may not slip away from us but go on increasing so long as the statute books contain a single trace of the record of our enslavement. So talking about slavery to debt slavery. As for me, I have but one ambition, and that is to deserve so well of you that when you come to write my epitaph, that you set beneath my name the single line, here lies a friend of the common people. So this is how Brian was billed, a friend of the common people. Now let's get into this gold standard, because this is interesting. Let that load up. Brian is elected. Our day has come at last. Down with the oppressors. Death to the rich man. Death to the gold bugs, they call them. Death to the capitalists. Give us back the money you have ground out of us. Doesn't it feel like that way in America? The money they ground out of us. Give us back the marrow of our bones, which you have used to grease the wheels of your chariots. The police force was now almost helpless. The men still used their sticks, but the blows were ineffectual and only served to increase the rage of the vast hordes now advancing upon Madison Square. Now, they talk about police shortage, which is happening right now. It's all here in the book, you guys. This book is actually happening right now. The Fifth Avenue Hotel will be the first to feel the fury of the mob. Would the troops be in time to save it? Now, this is Fifth Avenue Hotel, is very close to Thump's Hotel. A half cheer, half cry of joy goes up. So let's keep going with this, because there's more about this gold standard. Let's go back to page 14. Bayonets crossed and clashed in bearing down some vigorous foe, doubly vigorous foe. As the bells rang out after midnight, the last remnants of the mob were driven to cover, but the wheels of the dead wagons rattled till daybreak. And then the aged governor, in response to the mayor's, "Thank God we've saved the city," made answer. Let's go to the next page here. 22. So, here we go. Now, they talk a lot about the common people and how this president was able to relate to the common people. It says here, the common people who were so dear to Mr. Bryan and who had made him president in the very face of the prodigious opposition of the rich men, whose coffers had been thrown wide open, all to no purpose, and in spite too of the satanic and truly devilish power of that hell upon earth known as Wall Street, which had sweated gold in vain in its desperate efforts to fasten the chains of trusts and the claws of soulless monsters known as the corporations upon these very common people, soon to march in triumph before the silver chariot of the young conqueror from the West. Talk more about gold here. Universal gold standard. Now, these are all concepts that people who love freedom talk about all the time. Why isn't money backed by gold? Why are these people able to borrow this money, hand it out, with nothing to back it up? Well, because we're on the petrodollar, aren't we? Well, obviously that's going to end soon, because we don't have much interests in the Mideast anymore in the oil. That's all starting to dwindle down. So obviously this is all going to change. So what is the next standard going to be? Well, it isn't going to be gold, because that holds people accountable, right? They can't just print money to make themselves rich. So it says, in order that there may be immediate relief in the terrible financial depression now weighing upon our beloved country, consequent upon and resulting from the unlawful combination of capitalists and moneylenders, both in this republic and in England, and that the ruinous and inevitable progress toward a universal gold standard may be stayed. The President orders and directs immediate abandonment of the so-called gold reserve, and that on and after the promulgation of this order, the gold and silver standard of the Constitution be resumed and strictly maintained in all the business transactions of the government. So they got rid of the reserve, and it's about the gold standard. Let's keep reading. They talk more here about the gold reserve. Oh, we already read that part. Now, they talk about also a different kind of tax system that doesn't allow greedy, corrupt corporations off the hook. You know, the people whose lives are unaffected by the oppressive working class laws that keep people in poverty, they are the ones that run this country. They don't know the daily struggle that people like you and I go through, worried about the future, worried about where we're going to live, where, you know, rent's going up. Let me give you an example. I live in an area here in Connecticut right now. This isn't going to be my permanent home, but because of Vidco, all these remote people who wanted to work and get out of the city of New York have now come here and driven up the prices, almost doubling the rent. Now, at any given time, I could get a phone call from my landlord and he could say, oh, time to, you know, double your rent or whatever the case may be. These are the kinds of fears that people like you and I live in, right? That we're on the whim of these people. And then when they start pushing through their unfair laws, we're the ones who are forced to do it. People at the top don't care about stuff like that because they're not worried about what they're going to eat or where they're going to live. They might be worried about keeping their millions and billions, but they're not worried about the things that you and I worry about. And this is why you can never trust these people to rule over you, because they have no idea what your life is like. They have no idea. And when they say things like, you know, when inflation was happening, and then they got up in front of all of us and tried to tell us that, oh, it's no big deal. Oh, it's no big deal to you because you make, you know, double six-figure income. So, of course, it's no big deal to you. But this is a big deal to people when their grocery bills double over the past year. A lot of people can't afford that. Oh, but then they'll say, oh, you just need to work harder and improve your situation. Well, people are tired of working harder. Okay? Now, let's keep going with this, because they talk about this tax system that taxes profits, not the common man who lives paycheck to paycheck. Now, I don't think that any taxes are biblical. You guys know my feelings on that. But if you had to have a tax system, I think everybody agrees that the rich, by definition, are taking on far less of the burden of just living their life than people like you and I. And they should take on the majority, the profits of their labor, not just their businesses, just the profits of their labor should be what's taxed. Let's keep reading. Let's go to page 18 here. And read about this tax system that they're talking about here. All right, it says, all was peace and goodwill, for the people were at last victorious over their enemies, who had taxed and tithed them into a very living death. And that's exactly what it feels like with oppressive taxes. Now the laborer would not only be worthy of his hire, but it would be paid to him in a people's dollar for the people's good. And now the rich man's coffers would be made to yield up their ill-gotten gain, and the sun would look upon this broad and fair land and find no man without a market for the product of his labors. And that's the way it should be. In the greatest country that we're told that we live in the world, every man who is willing to work a full day should have a product for his labors. He should be able to live a comfortable life without any worries of anything, pretty much, if you're in the greatest country in the world, if you're willing to go out and work 40 hours a week. And it doesn't matter what you do. You could be a janitor, or you could be anything. Whatever it is that you choose to do, if you're willing to work, should provide you a secure future. Okay. It's everything else that's gotten in the way that has not allowed that to happen in America. That's how the working poor class emerged. We should have had laws against that. There should be no working poor class in America. I don't know how you get there. You don't get there by giving out a bunch of money. You get there by saying, we're not going to allow this or that in America. We're not going to allow someone to have to work 40 hours a week and still be poor. So whatever we need to do to fix that, we need to do it. If that means less profits coming out of these corporations, then that so be it. So what they've done is they've convinced everybody that if we tax the rich, then the rich won't create jobs for us. And that's simply not the case. Rich people are always going to want to be rich. They're always going to, do things to try to get rich. That's what rich people do, because they want power and control. And there's no reason why someone should be so rich and at the expense of the people working for them that they can afford to buy $500,000 cars and live in huge mansions and just spend. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. That's greed at that point. Now, some people would say, well, there shouldn't be laws against greed. It should be a person's right to be greedy. Well, yeah, it's a person's right to be greedy, I suppose. But are we here on the bottom just going to simply put up with that? Aren't we the majority? Shouldn't we be able to make laws that say, you know what, you can be greedy, but there are going to be limits to your greed? Because many people are suffering because you want more stuff. So, I don't know. Some people might disagree with me on that, but let's keep reading here. Henceforth, the rich man should, as was right and proper, pay a royal nation's taxes on his broad shoulders, where they belong. So they're talking about a better and more fair tax systems. That's what they're talking about here. Now, let's keep going with this as we get through this. We're about 3/4 of the way through. So, at this point in the book, things just descend into civil war. Why? Because the dollar crashes and people have no food. Now, the book isn't really clear on how or why this happens. It's spawned out of fear. Here's an analysis of all of the chapters here. This is in Reddit. I'll link this in case you guys want the Cliff Notes version of it. But this summary goes through all of the actual chapters, everything we just talked about. But basically, everything descends into this civil war, the North and the South. And there's like speculation that occurs because of the silver gold standard. And the one thing that the president does that doesn't make any sense in this book is that he taxes the South, who is way poorer than the North, but he overtaxes the South. And that part of the book really didn't make sense to me, but it really angered them. They were almost being like punished for like the civil war that had happened previously, a couple decades earlier, is kind of what I got out of that part of the book. Well, then the North ends up rebelling against the government too. So both the North and the South rebel against the government. So the president shows up at the Capitol, but he's already been ostracized. He's forbidden to speak, and he's actually asked to resign. Then a BOMB goes off and blows up the crapper hole right on New Year's. And at that point in the book, the democracy is dead. Now, does all this sound familiar? Because remember Cruella Harris said that they found a BOMB at the Crappit hole and she was like in real danger and like they disarmed it or something, but yet they can't find the people who put it there with all the cameras they have there. And all of that happened 6 days after the new year at the crapper hole, just like in the book. Weird. So the president's minions enter the crapper hole, but their voices are not heard. That's what happened in real life. But in the book, it's the president who enters and his voice is not heard. Let's read page 55 here. 56, the very end of the book here. Now, this is like a pretty creepy ending. A lot of people took note of that. Let's read this. With a sudden blow that startled every living soul within its hearing, the speaker's gavel fell. The president, said he with superb dignity that called down from the galleries a burst of deafening applause, must not make reference to pending legislation. Constitution guarantees him the right from time to time to give to Congress information of the Union. He must keep himself strictly within the lines of the constitutional limit or withdraw from the bar of the House. A deadly pallor overspread the face of the chief magistrate till it seemed he must sink then and there into this sleep which knows no awakening. But he gasped, he leaned forward, he raised his hand again imploringly, and as he did so, the bells of the city began to toll the hour of midnight. The new year, the new century was born. I mean, this is so eerily cryptic and so in line with what happened at the Crapper Hole, isn't it? Right around the same time of the year. But with the last stroke, a fearful and thunderous discharge as of 1,000 monster pieces of artillery shook the Crapper to its very foundation, making the stoutest hearts stand still and blanching cheeks that had never known the coward color. The dome of the Crapper Hole had been destroyed by dynamite. In a few moments, when it was seen that the chamber had suffered no harm, the leader of the House moved the final passage of the act. The president was led away, and the Republican senators and representative passed slowly out of the disfigured Crapper Hole, while the tellers prepared to make the vote of the House. This is crazy, you guys. The bells were ringing a glad welcome to the new century, but a solemn tolling would have been a better thing, for the Republic of Washington was no more. It had died so peacefully that the world could not believe the tidings of its passing away. As the dawn broke cold and gray, now obviously that's a double meaning there, right? The dawn, right? Dawn, thump. Wow, let's keep reading here. And as the first dim light fell upon that shattered dome, glorious even in its ruins, a single human eye, filled with gleam of devilish joy. So what is this? This is like the devil's eye, watching the end of democracy, watching to see how ultimately his right-left paradigm was able to implode humanity, to implode America in on one another. Let's keep reading. Looked up at how long and steadily, and then its owner was caught up and lost in the surging mass of humanity that held the Crapper Hole, girt round and round. Wow. So what does this book mean? These are the last sentences of the entire book. We are going to talk about Skynet and exactly what it is, where it's headed. We're going to draw similarities and conclusions between the Terminator films and what is actually happening in our reality. Now, understand that Skynet exists above as well as below. And this is how the controllers like to do it, don't they? Above would be the satellite system that links up with the ground system of 5G Whiz and beyond to basically create a prison for the inhabitants of the planet. Now, we already know that they're looking for excuses to change the narrative. They're looking for excuses to control everything that exists on the planet. They're doing it under the guise of warming and climate and sickness and everything else that they can imagine to cook up to justify their control of the planet. So we know this is where things are headed. So we're going to look at the history of Skynet, because there is actually a system. There are actually several systems in place since the 2000s that go by the name of Skynet. Now, the first one that I read, and this will give us a snapshot into the future of what they have in store for us was China. China tries its hand at pre-crime. Now, if you look at the date on this, 3/3/2016, they were already involved in this system called Skynet. Let's read this article. China's effort to flush out threats to stability is expanding into an area that used to exist only in dystopian sci-fi pre-crime. Communist Party has directed one of its country's largest state-run defense contractors, China Electronics Technology Group, to develop software to collate data on jobs, hobbies, consumption habits, and other behavior of ordinary citizens to predict acts before they occur. Now, this, of course, is the social credit system of China. This was in its infancy. It's gone full on since then. No information gets out of China unless they want it to get out. Let's keep reading here. It's very crucial to examine the cause after an act of terrorism, Wu Manqing, the chief engineer for the military contractor, told reporters. But what is more important is to predict the upcoming activity. So this is their attempt at pre-crime. So in here, they describe a system of data processing. There are not enough examples of terrorist activity to model what it looks like in data, and that's true no matter how much data you have, says Jim Harper. You need yeast to make bread. You can't make up for a lack of yeast by adding more flour. Now, this article goes on to explain that Skynet was the actual name of the program that China was using. It then was modified in 2018 and renamed to be called Sharp Eyes. Let's read this. China is expanding its video surveillance network to achieve 100% nationwide coverage by 2020. This was dated 2018, including facial recognition capabilities and a database that allows authorities to track and cross-check video data across the country. Now understand that in order for this to happen, you have to have the below part of the infrastructure in place, which is gee whiz. You can't process all this data with anything short of gee whiz. The program is known as Sharp Eyes and represents a top-level push for video surveillance that's globally unprecedented. In this post, we examine the requirements for Sharp Eyes, what role facial recognition plays, and how Chinese manufacturers are capitalizing on the opportunities. Now, let me go back to this story here because I want to search this story. Okay, let's read this part too, because I wanted you guys to see that they had actually called this Skynet back in 2016. New anti-teeter laws that went into effect on January 1st allow authorities to gain access to bank accounts, telecommunications, and a national network of surveillance cameras called Skynet. So there it is right there. This was back in 2016. This was a Bloomberg article. So that you know that we're not just stretching things to make it sound like this is going to happen, when in actuality, this is their plan from the beginning. Now let's keep reading about Sharp Eyes. This is the update to Skynet. It says China already launched a national surveillance system called Skynet in 2005. So this went all the way back to 2005 to fight crime and prevent possible disasters. Skynet is a literal translation of the Chinese word for the program and has no relation to the Terminator series. Yeah, right. But Sharp Eyes represents a large expansion of Skynet with much bigger goals. Sharp Eyes was launched after China's top planning authority, the National Development and Reform Commission, in 2015, that video surveillance cover 100% of China's public areas and key industries. Wow. So this is where things are headed. Omnipresent, fully networked, always working, and fully controllable video surveillance set up at all levels of government, down to local party committees. So, you know how Satan says he wants to elevate himself above the Most High. He wants to see all things everywhere all the time. Well, this is his attempt at being like the all-knowing Most High. Now, he can never be exactly like the Most High, obviously. But this is the next best thing. Literally seeing inside people's homes, their lives, listening through their phones. By 2020, there will be no blind spots in video coverage of key nodes on major roads, no blind spots in densely populated areas, nor any important foreign-related sites. Now, it's important to note here that they're saying in densely populated areas. This is why I've been telling you guys, get out of the cities. They can't cover, the grid cannot cover every square inch of the planet, nor would they want to. It's a waste of resources. They focus where they can get the biggest bang for their buck, where the most people are concentrated, because it's easier to control the grid. I know I've said this many times, but why would you want to box yourself into a cage? That's literally what you're doing when you go and live in a big city. They have all the exit points covered. They have cameras on every corner. Now in most major cities, they can use the data real time to track you down instantly. Now we saw a bunch of this play out in the Terminator franchise, where they would run out of these outlying areas and the machines couldn't track them down. They had different tricks that they used, but for the most part, they stayed away from the populated areas. They stayed away from the city centers to avoid capture. They went underground, some of them, in the franchise series. So this is real. Now, I want you to notice a few things as we go through this. Skynet has a backbone, and that backbone is data, network speed, and computing power. In other words, the backbone is 5G Whiz. They needed it all along. That's why it was so important. Notice how Thump has always continued to praise China. All I did was type in Trump praises China, and all these stories came up of all the time he complimented different aspects of Chinese life. For instance, praising them how they covered the Vidco spamdemic. He praises them about the handling of people's rights. And it goes on and on and on. So why is he doing that? Well, because he billed himself as the president of law and order. And he wants to control the citizens. Now, most, people who control, the worst of the worst when it comes to leaders throughout history, always would lead with freedom, wouldn't they? But in actuality, what they really wanted was just the opposite of freedom. So how can you compliment and praise China for anything they do when they do not represent freedom? And then you yourself claim to represent freedom. The two don't jive. Basically, they want America to look like China. That was the goal all along. China is the testing grounds, the proving grounds. They've already disarmed their citizens. Eventually, they'll disarm us, and we will become like China. Now, all of you that come to this channel already know all this, okay? I'm preaching to the choir at this point. But it's important to review all this so that we know what's coming. So, this whole thing about America becoming like China one day, this is what they're talking about when they talk about keeping up with China's network capability and 5G Whiz. That's what it's really about. It's not about, us becoming a real player in the world and, defense and all these things that they're saying it's about, and being competitive. It's not about any of that. It's really about control and the control of the citizens. You see, if you were to plot this on a graph and look at the sentiment of Americans versus the agenda that the elite want to push through, you would see both of them diverging or going away from each other. The two lines would, as time goes by, become farther and further apart because their agenda directly opposes what it means to be an American and what it means to be free. So they have to use these tricks and gimmicks to try to coerce us to believe that we're supposed to give up those freedoms and rights. But so far, they have been largely unsuccessful. And so what's happened is people are getting more and more angry. And when people get more and more angry, less and less people vote, less and less people invest in the economy the way that they want you to. Debt slavery, for instance. If you were to look at people in debt, I mean, I even look back to like the 90s and the 2000s, and everybody had a credit card, and everybody's credit cards were maxed out. People were borrowing against their homes like crazy. Well, we have a different environment now, don't we? Not so much credit running around anymore. Not so many people with mortgages, and you definitely don't want to start borrowing against your house. It's a different environment now. And this hurts their bottom line. This is why they had to pivot to something else to make money, which is pharmaceuticals. Because all the things that people used to invest in, you know, financial system, the economy, people started going away from that because they saw that the writing was on the wall. They saw that, wow, I better start paying off my home if I can. I better start making different choices because the future is uncertain. Now, I read a crazy story that there were 60,000 less children born in America in 2020 when we were in the midst of the spamdemic. So the birth rate has plummeted in America. Plummeted. So what is that going to do in the long run? Well, you're going to start to see the population of America start to decline. And as time goes on, some of these projections that were, you know, spoken of on some of these sites simply will start to come true. A third of American population gone. And that could possibly happen. If you have a couple of cycles of people not having children, that could happen very quickly as the older generation starts to die off. Now, understand that this whole gee whiz thing and you know, thump passing 5G whiz and beyond, Bo Jiven feels the exact same way. He's not off the hook on this, but he's really not a factor right now because for one, he doesn't even talk about it because it's already been sold to the American public. People think that this is going to be so much more convenient when really this is just a change in the technology with many more base towers than the 4G whiz. They need many, many more because the signal doesn't travel as far. So you're going to see these things everywhere. They're actually already everywhere, just waiting to be turned on. Now, this whole thing is going to go down on January 19th, which, of course, is an interesting date. They probably picked January 19th because that's blind 11 backwards. And we know from experience that every 19 years is when they like to do their little dirty tricks, right? We had blind 11 19 years before VidCo 19. 19 years separated those two mass events. Now, here's another interesting Skynet system. This is in the UK. So many of these countries already have systems set up by name called Skynet that are looking at and monitoring the citizens. Okay? We already know that there's drones out there that are autonomous and can seek out targets. So we're already here, you guys. We're already in the Terminator scenario. Let's read about Skynet in the UK. Skynet is a family of military communication satellites now operated by the Airbus Defence and Space on behalf of the United Kingdom's Ministry of Defence. They provide strategic and tactical communication services to the branches of the British Armed Forces, British intelligence agencies, some UK government departments and agencies, and to allied governments. Since 2015, when Skynet coverage was extended eastward in conjunction with a satellite over America, it offers near global coverage. Wow. Now, what is going on with this? Well, they're saying this is for defense. Look at this. They even call it Five Eyes. Kind of sounds like the Chinese counterpart. Now, they bill this as defense, but at any time, this can be turned against the citizens. And when it does, when it becomes self-aware, it will enable real-time surveillance of social media accounts, credit card transactions, and every other single electronic movement of every citizen in America. And through the algorithms, they'll be able to identify gathering threats. They'll be efficiently identified and quickly identified before they can affect any change politically or sentiment. I mean, they're literally going to be able to look at the sentiment of a people, a group of people, and they can put a stop to that with censorship or by taking out key people who could affect change by any means necessary. And we saw this also play out in the series Westworld in one of the latest seasons. And they had a system called Rehoboam, which held in its power the ability to basically use all of the data coming from its Skynet counterpart. And then they can basically put that through an algorithm and then determine what specific threats there were to the balance of the world, the entire world. And at that point, they would send out people to take out these threats one by one by one to restore the balance. Well, that's where we're headed with this. They will look at something and they will say, wow, that could destabilize the world. We're going to have to handle that threat. We've tried censorship. We've tried this. We tried that. And now, then they'll just go one by one and do it. Take out individual threats. So this is the United Kingdom's version of Skynet. You can see there are many iterations of it as I scroll down the page here. Going back many, many years. Groups of satellites. Now, at some point, all of these systems will be tied in together. And that will be, and again, once again, what's necessary for that to happen is 5G Wiz in order to tie all these systems in together into real time, an international system. Now, we're going to get to the point where we're already there now, where you can't even discuss things electronically. You can't call someone on the phone or send an email or text message. They're already collecting that data. They just don't have the computing power yet to process all that data. And that's where Gee Whiz comes in. So, in effect, humans will basically lose their ability to communicate. We're going to be cast back into the Stone Ages. Now, they're also talking about another technology after 5G Whiz, and that's 6G Whiz. And at that point, they will be on the verge of being able to pick up personal conversations on the street, right out in the public airspace. Now, I wanted to take a closer look at the logo for the Terminator fictional Skynet from the Terminator franchise. This is it here. And as you guys know, we take a very close look, a detailed look at all of these symbols going back decades. And so what I did was I counted the steps of the pyramid in the Skynet logo. And when I count this diamond up here separately from this side part of the pyramid, I got 33 steps total to the top of this pyramid. And when I count these three separately, like if you were just to count the steps here, and the steps here separately, you get 17, 17, and then 16 at this diamond in the top. So I began to think about what those numbers might mean. And then I realized that the 33 total from the bottom and then recounting here from this diamond to the top, the 33 total steps must represent the 33 years after the first Terminator film from 1984. And that puts us in the year 2017. 17 steps here, 17 steps here. I think this was a timeline for 2017. And why do I say that? Well, because in 2017, they did a 33 years since the Terminator films. How old was John Connor in one of the films? 33 years old. So they recognize this 2017 date. 33 years since 1984. Now, why was 2017 so important? Well, this article tells the story. Here we go. 2017, Halloween. This is when 5GWiz actually was finally completed. 33 years, just like the timeline said on the pyramid. Skynet was self-aware, so it's already happened. They just let it, so they first ran it in China, and now it will be here. Let's read this article. It says, the race to define 5GWiz may be ending. Again, this was Halloween 2017. But the process to design and deploy 5GWiz technology is just beginning. Let's read this article. It's all about 5GWiz, no matter where you go or who you're talking to. 5GWiz is the center of conversations about exciting new technology, while recent announcements from Mobile World Congress indicate that 5GWiz is already here. They're saying it right here, but the article is saying, oh, but it's not. But it really was, because we just looked at the timeline that said it was. The wireless communication community has had a busy year, from progress made on the standardization process and essential updates communicated from regulatory bodies. Let's make this a little bit bigger so you guys can see this. That's better. And let's keep reading here. From progress made on the standardization process and essential updates communicated from regulatory bodies to gaining understanding of the channel for newly proposed millimeter wave frequencies and technologies under development that will turn 5GWiz into commercial reality. Anticipation for GWiz, we're just going to start calling it GWiz, is at an all-time high. So what do all the accomplishments from the past year mean for GWiz? And when will GWiz be here? There's a lot left to be defined when it comes to GWiz, but one thing is certain: sub-6 gigahertz spectrum is still very important, and millimeter wave frequencies will be used to supplement sub-6 gigahertz technology. Figure 1 shows the wide range of requirements expected of GWiz, from ultra-reliable high-bandwidth communication for enhanced mobile broadband applications to low-bandwidth machine-to-machine type communications we expect to see in the Internet of Things applications. So, look at this. 666. You got a hexagon, and a hexagon, and this makes up the business model for GWiz according to their own little diagram here. Unbelievable. So let's keep reading here. The timeline is defined as 2 phases of research. Phase 1 for 40 gigahertz and phase 2 for sub 100 gigahertz. So this is just the technology behind it. I'll link this story. This is very important because they already knew when they were making these Terminator movies what they were going to do 33 years after 1984. And it's interesting because 1984 represents the loss of all freedoms and rights from the book 1984, doesn't it? Doesn't it? Now, here's the insidious thing about all of this that we're talking about today. And this is where we need to take personal responsibility for our part in all of this. It is us who built our own prison. Now that theme and that aspect plays out in the Terminator franchise films. They realized that they were the ones who built Skynet and the machines. They were the ones who built their own prison. Why do we keep doing it? It's like cattle being used as labor to build their own slaughterhouses. It's because we place such high importance on money. We don't know how to leave the beast system. We still want to borrow money. We still want to have luxuries. We still want to live in Egypt. We still want to have convenience. We still want to be able to call somebody up to deliver food to our homes and all the other little things that we think we deserve. We don't want to go in the wilderness like most of God's people did. We don't want to go in the unincorporated areas where we're not going to have all the little fun things to do and be in close proximity to Disneyland and the beach and whatever else it is that we think we deserve. So we fill these high-paying jobs, the very jobs that have built the technocratic fence that will soon enslave us all. Now let's get into the summary of the fictional Skynet in the Terminator series. This is it right here, right out of Wikipedia. It says here in the original 1984 movie, Skynet is a revolutionary artificial intelligence system built by Cyberdyne Systems for Sac NORAD. The character Kyle Reese explains in the film, Defense Network computers, new, powerful, hooked into everything, trusted to run it all. They say it got smart, a new order of intelligence. According to Reese, Skynet saw all humans as a threat, not just the ones on the other side, and decided our fate in a microsecond. Extermination. What do they keep telling us about humanity? We eat too much, we consume too much, we're going to cause the end of the planet. This is all set up to fall in line exactly with the way the plot went in the movie. It began a nuclear war which destroyed most of the human population and initiated a program of that word against survivors. Skynet used its resources to gather slave labor force from surviving humans. Under the leadership of John Connor, the human resistance eventually destroyed Skynet's grid in 2029. That ain't gonna happen. This is the bait, right? So the whole reason why they made this Terminator franchise was to bait people into thinking that they can defeat Skynet. So in the back of your mind, you think you're John Connor. Okay? Or you think you're his mother. And that you're somehow going to stand a chance against this technology. And it's simply not the case. It's a dream to think that I don't care if we had 600 million pop sticks. It takes guts. It takes a lot of things that we don't have in America anymore. We've been basically put to sleep through all of the things that have been given to us in the convenience of life. Most of us are out of shape. You know, most of us can't run a mile. And so the answer is not the fight. The answer is the spiritual answer, the minds. Because these people are trying to get us into a fight. That's the whole purpose and goal of this. So that they can play their little war games and justify it because of the domestic threat. That's what they're trying to do. And if you go along with it, you walk right into their trap and you're just going to get picked off one by one. Look what happened to the people in Crazy Stan. Picked off one by one. The media then repackaged the entire scenario, saying that they were foreign fighters, which was just not the case. And Russia came in and they just hammered the people. Shoot on sight, and that was the end of that. that's exactly how it'll go down here. There'll be skirmishes, and the people that they hire to come after people who are resisting will be emboldened because they'll feel like, oh, there's aggression. So we have to meet the aggression. We can't just have lawlessness. We can't just have looting. Why do you think that they're putting it in our minds and making it okay to loot? Do you really think that they're going to let people get away with that? It's part of the programming, so that when the time comes and they really drop the hammer and make really unfair laws and people start revolting, then their natural tendency, because of the programming, will be to start looting. When typically that's not how most people operate. I don't think about looting something when I'm protesting, and most people I know do not. But because of the programming, making it look okay, letting people get away with it in plain sight, that will justify later aggression back towards the people. And that will let the controllers, that will allow them to try to blame foreign people. They'll say these are foreign influences. These are radicalized people who have listened to certain channels and listened to certain countries, and they're in our midst. Why do you think they're letting all these foreigners in? Do you see now the setup? This is why they let them in. Because now they have a boogeyman, someone they can blame, so that when they want to come in, they can take everybody out. Boogeyman and anyone resisting. Shoot on sight. You don't think it'll happen in America? You watch. I give it within the next year to 5 years. At the latest, there will be shoot on sight in America. It's all being set up. Let's keep reading this about Terminator, because this is interesting. Gives us a snapshot into where these things are headed. Now, the best thing you can do is stay out of these conflicts and be away from the big cities. That will save you 80% of your headache. Stay out of the big cities and stay out of the conflict. Pray for Jesus to come and save us from this tribulation. That's what we're told to do. And then he comes with a sword and finishes it all. And if you die in the process, then you have a fast ticket to heaven. Back in time to 1984 to kill... Wait, let's read this. In a last effort, Skynet sent a cyborg Terminator, the Model 101, back in time to 1984 to kill Connor's mother, Sarah, before she could give birth to John. Connor sent back his own operative, Kyle Reese, to save her. Reese and Sarah fall in love and eventually do the dirty, resulting in Sarah getting pregnant with John. Terminator is destroyed in a hydraulic press. We all remember how that went down. In Terminator 2, the damaged CPU, the right arm of the first Terminator were discovered by Cyberdyne, began the basis for their later work on Skynet. Now you notice the time travel component to this as well. I wanted to bring up. There's something to this. Okay? 5G Wiz technology requires lots and lots of copper. And this is why there was the copper shortage. Now we had anticipated that copper shortage. And everybody that was watching during that time when these coins started going missing, we said, well, they're probably melting them down and they're going to use the copper for this 5G Wiz infrastructure. They're never going to tell the American people that that's what they're doing, but that's exactly what they were doing. Shortly after that, within the following year, copper prices went through the roof. And anybody that was listening who had invested in copper basically doubled or tripled their money. Now, I don't recommend investing in anything in this fallen system, but it just goes to show you that, you know, God wants us to know what's going on. Okay. He's not going to leave us in the dark if we're listening. So copper, we also found, has something to do with this possession and time travel. Demons hopping down through time. They need copper. And I don't know how this exactly works, but there's been too much symbolism too much symbolism surrounding copper. I remember we decoded a film called 13, what was it called? 13 Ghosts or 13, I can't remember what it was. But there was a house that they went into that actually was made out of copper. And they would pass through the veil. And they were like, it was like basically a haunted house of sorts. But it also had like a time travel component to it. But anyway, so now you're starting to see the connection here. 5G Whiz, copper, time travel, Terminator, Skynet. It's all one. Now, eventually, I believe they're going to weaponize Skynet to possess people and actually control people's behavior. That's the end game for these people. We're basically going to become like the Matrix, just stuck in a pod, asleep, or controlled by the net. Now, let's keep reading here. In the second film, Miles Dyson, director of special projects for Cyberdyne, is months away from inventing a revolutionary type of microprocessor based on the reverse engineering of these parts. 3 years later, Cyberdyne Systems will become the largest supplier of military computer systems. Now, here's what's interesting about this. Notice how there's a cause and effect going on here. So notice that events are caused by them trying to intervene with the history through this time travel component, right? Now, this is interesting. This is an interesting aspect because I think that this points all the way back to ancient Egypt and something that they're bringing forward from the past into modern times. I believe this has to do with the black goo. This has to do with ancient Egypt and the preservation of the ancient DNA in these Canopy jars, bringing it forward to the future. And somehow they're going to merge that ancient DNA with the modern machines. And they will basically create machines that have consciousness and are self-aware. And I think this is where all of it's headed. So there's your cause and effect, past versus present, present affecting past, and past affecting present. I think it all goes to ancient Egypt. Now, you're probably wondering, why does all this matter, Casey? I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm a lawful person, and I just pretty much follow the laws. And yeah, some of the laws are unfair, but I just go along to get along, and everything should be fine, right? No, it shouldn't. And there is a line that's being encroached upon every single day between lawful activity and your human rights. Now, if this last year wasn't a great example of that happening, I don't know what is. People, for instance, losing their jobs, losing their business licenses, having their businesses shut down, medical degrees threatened, their children, in some cases, being taken away over an arbitrary command that they wished not to follow. And a command that affected their personal bodily autonomy. And with the whim of a controller, at any given moment, a law or command can be passed that you don't agree with. And it's happening right now. Now, in the past, these laws that were unfair, they were simply not enforceable. And that is until today, when Skynet can now handle and process infinite amounts of intelligence and data and report that data to law enforcement to enact the rule of law. And this is why you see the controllers acting so bold lately, aren't they? And handing down these unthinkable edicts, like doing away with natural gas. Oh, we're just going to arbitrarily decide that in the year 2024, there is no more natural gas. Oh, and by the way, you can't burn a fire in your own fireplace. Oh, and by the way, there will be no more gas cars sold at such and such date. and you can't use any more generators in this particular state or that state. Give me a break. You can't run a generator to keep your house warm. These are the kind of laws and edicts that there was no majority vote on these laws and edicts. There was no majority vote. There was no representative vote for these things. They just decided that this is what they wanted to do. If you were to do a real poll, well, in most places in America, if you were to do a real poll, a lot of people are actually really brainwashed. And they think that these things would be a good thing. But if you were to do a real poll across middle America, you would see that nobody would vote for the things that they're pushing onto us. And so now the controllers can be very bold in their lies, because what are we going to do about it? Absolutely nothing, because everyone's deceived.